At my mother's funeral, my brother rose during the will reading and declared, since I was the one who looked after her, the house and money are mine. He even brandished a paper, insisting it was her signature. I simply nodded and replied, fascinating, while concealing a smile. Because Mom had already. What would you do if your own brother, right after your mother's funeral, tried to steal everything from you, then twisted the knife by erasing her very memory? Because that's exactly what happened to me, and trust me, it was a gut-wrenching betrayal. My name's Nathan, I'm 29, and honestly, I never thought I'd be airing my family's dirty laundry like this. But some stories just demand to be told. This whole mess kicked off right after my mom passed away. She wasn't just my mom, she was the glue, the absolute backbone that held every brittle piece of our family together. Without her, all the cracks started showing, and some of those cracks were more like gaping, ugly canyons. And my older brother, Lucas, wasted no time taking full advantage. At the funeral, I could already feel this weird tension, like a storm brewing under a deceptively calm sky. Everyone mourns differently, sure, but Lucas had this unsettling energy. He wasn't grieving, he was calculating. He kept hovering around conversations about Mom's house, her savings, even her jewelry. Every time someone said how much they'd miss her, Lucas would nod, but his eyes would dart around like he was already planning his next move. It didn't sit right with me. But I kept my mouth shut. Losing Mom was enough pain for 1 week. I wasn't about to pick a fight with him there, of all places. Then came the reading of the will. The lawyer had us all gather in the old dining room, the one where Mom used to make us sit down for Sunday dinners, no matter how much we'd fought that week. I took my chair, the one closest to the kitchen, and it felt so heavy, like I was carrying her absence on my shoulders. That's when Lucas stood up, before anyone could even breathe. He didn't just stand, he performed. He cleared his throat, straightened his jacket, looking around like some actor about to take center stage. And then he dropped the first bomb. Since I took care of her, he announced, the house and savings belong to me. The room went dead silent. My aunt's mouth literally hung open. My stomach twisted into knots, because that wasn't true. Not entirely. Yes, Lucas lived closer and visited sometimes, but took care of her? Mom had a nurse. I handled all the paperwork, the bills, even stayed over plenty of weekends to help with groceries and meds. But the way Lucas said it, like he was the sole devoted child, made me feel like I'd just been erased from the story. Then he did something worse. He waved a piece of paper. He claimed it was Mom's signature, that she'd written up her wishes herself, giving him everything. My heart dropped. From across the room, I could tell something was off. The handwriting looked shaky, uneven, like a bad copy of her neat, looping script. But Lucas held it high, like a holy text, as if we all just had to accept it. I didn't argue. Not yet. Instead, I just nodded slowly and said, interesting. Inside, my thoughts were racing. Lucas was pulling something so bold, so ugly, and he was so sure of himself he didn't even hide the smug curve of his mouth. But I knew something he didn't, something Mom had done long before she passed. Something that made his whole little performance meaningless. And in that moment, I had to hide a smile. Lucas thought he was already standing on top of the mountain, but he had no idea the ground beneath him was about to crumble. This was the first sign of disrespect, the opening act of what would turn into a full-scale war. And as much as I wanted to call him out right then and there, I knew patience was the key. Let him feel victorious for now. Let him think he'd fooled everyone. The higher he climbed on his fake pedestal, the harder he'd fall when the truth finally came crashing down. So I sat back, quiet, my fists clenched under the table. The tension was building like a storm on the horizon. This was just the beginning. And I could feel it. Things were only going to get uglier from here. Lucas didn't waste a second basking in the silence he'd created. The lawyer hadn't even opened the official envelope yet, but my brother was already strutting like the verdict was final. He tucked that suspicious paper back into his folder and sat down with this smug little smirk plastered on his face, the kind that made my blood simmer. I caught my aunt's eyes, flickering toward me, then back at Lucas, but she didn't say a word. No one did. That silence? It gave him permission to keep going. And oh, he did. Over the next few days, Lucas started acting like Mom's house already had his name etched above the front door. Mom's place, her home of 30 years, still faintly smelled of her lavender candles. But that didn't stop him from marching through the rooms like a landlord taking inventory. He even told me, "You should probably start boxing up your things, Nathan. Mom would want me to keep the house as it is. You know, her memory intact." The nerve of him. as if I had clutter lying around. The only things I had there were a couple of old photo albums in the attic and a box of childhood books Mom refused to throw away. But Lucas spoke with this tone that implied I was a guest overstaying my welcome in my own mother's home. I bit my tongue and just said, "I'll deal with my stuff later," just to keep the peace. But that peace didn't last long. By the end of the week, Lucas called a family meeting in the living room. I walked in to find he'd already seated our cousins and a couple of extended relatives around Mom's coffee table. He had bills, insurance papers, even a pen sitting dramatically on a yellow legal pad. He cleared his throat like some CEO preparing to present quarterly earnings. As the one who cared for Mom, he started again, repeating his script. "I'll be taking over all her affairs. The house is mine. The savings will be consolidated into an account under my name." And then, he actually had the audacity to glance at me. "Nathan doesn't need to worry about it. He has his own life to live." I nearly laughed out loud at that. My own life to live? I'd been the one juggling Mom's medical bills, making sure her prescriptions were filled, driving her to endless doctor's appointments when Lucas was always too busy. Yet here he was, rewriting history right in front of everyone. One of our cousins, Grace, raised a timid hand, like she was in school. "Shouldn't we, wait for the official will?" she asked softly. Lucas waved her off. "Oh, don't worry. I've got it here," he said, patting that same folder with the fake paper inside. "The lawyer's just going to confirm what Mom already wrote herself. I'm just trying to make things easier on everyone by getting ahead." The manipulation was thick in the air. He wasn't just claiming things. He was trying to gaslight the entire family into believing this had always been the plan. That questioning him would mean disrespecting Mom's wishes. And worse, he kept bringing up how he took care of her, as if repeating the phrase enough times would magically make it truth. After that meeting, I noticed how quickly relatives started treating me differently. A cousin I'd grown up with, Michael, pulled me aside and said, "Look, Nathan, if Mom wanted Lucas to have the house, maybe it's best to just let him. You don't want to make this ugly." Ugly? The situation was already festering like a wound. Lucas had poisoned the well, painting himself as the saint and me as the outsider, the greedy younger brother trying to snatch something that wasn't mine. Every time I opened my mouth to defend myself, someone would give me this look like I was the one stirring drama in the middle of our grief. But the worst part was watching Lucas move into Mom's bedroom like he belonged there. He didn't even wait. Within days, he'd swapped her floral bedspread for his own gray comforter, stacked his sneakers neatly in her closet, and started rearranging the furniture. I walked in once and caught him measuring the wall where her cross had hung for decades, muttering something about a bigger TV fitting nicely. That hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just entitlement anymore. It was a razor. He wasn't preserving her memory. He was scrubbing it away, replacing it with his own. And then came the real slap in the face. One evening, when I stopped by to drop off some mail from the lawyer, Lucas met me at the door with his arms crossed. "Nathan," he said, his voice cold. "I don't think you should come by unannounced anymore. This is my home now, and I need to protect my space. If you need anything, call first." I froze on the porch, staring at the house where I'd grown up, where Mom had hugged me after my first heartbreak, where she'd spent her final days. My home. And now my own brother was barring me from it like I was a trespasser. Inside me, something snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't shove past him. I just smiled politely, turned on my heel, and walked back to my car. Because in that moment, I realized the truth. Lucas was overplaying his hand. He was digging himself deeper into a pit he couldn't climb out of. And when the real will was read, the official one Mom had carefully written and signed, everything he'd built on lies and manipulation would collapse. But for now, I let him think he'd won. I tried to keep my distance after that night on the porch. I told myself to be patient, to let the lawyer handle everything, to not get sucked into Lucas's games. But Lucas wasn't satisfied with just staking his claim. He needed everyone to see him as the rightful heir, the martyr who gave up his life for Mom. And to do that, he had to drag me down in front of the family. The first strike came quietly, through whispers. A week after the funeral, I noticed cousins giving me side-eye at gatherings or suddenly changing the subject when I walked into the room. It didn't take long to find out why. Lucas had been telling everyone that I hadn't even visited Mom in her last months, that I'd abandoned her while he was the only one who stayed. He spun this story so smoothly that some relatives, people who should have known better, actually started to believe it. Grace, the cousin who'd spoken up at his so-called meeting, called me late one night. "Nathan," she said, her voice hesitant. I don't know what's going on between you and Lucas, but people are saying you didn't care for and at all. That you only show up now because of the inheritance. Is that true? My chest tightened. I remembered every Sunday I'd spent sitting with Mom in that kitchen, every grocery trip, every night in the hospital waiting room while Lucas claimed he was too busy with work. And now he had the gall to erase all of that with a few poisonous words. But the rumors were just the beginning. The real betrayal hit harder. One afternoon, I stopped by the house, my mom's house, because the lawyer had asked me to pick up some documents. I called ahead, as Lucas demanded, and he grudgingly agreed to let me come by. When I arrived, I walked through the front door and immediately felt something was off. The walls were bare. Mom's paintings, her watercolors of the garden she'd loved so much, were gone. The shelves that used to hold family photo albums were empty. Even her little porcelain angel figurines, which she'd collected since before I was born, had vanished. I found Lucas in the living room, his feet propped up on the coffee table, flipping through a glossy real estate magazine. When I asked what happened, he didn't even look up. "Oh, I sold those," he said casually. Most of Mom's stuff was clutter. Buyers don't want to see personal junk when a house is being prepped. I froze. Sold? My voice cracked. Those weren't yours to sell, Lucas. Those were her things. Our family's memories. He finally glanced at me, his expression flat. Look, Nathan, someone had to start making responsible decisions. You weren't here. I was. So I did what had to be done. I walked through the house in disbelief. Her jewelry box gone. Her sewing machine, the one she'd used to make our Halloween costumes when we were kids, gone. Even the framed photo of us as children sitting on Santa's lap, one of Mom's favorites, had been stripped from the mantel. The house looked hollow, like someone had gutted her presence out of it. I spun back to him, anger boiling in my chest. You had no right. None. That wasn't clutter, that was her life. How dare you sell it without even talking to me? Lucas leaned back, smirking. Don't get sentimental. You've always been too emotional about this stuff. Mom trusted me to handle things. You? You're just here trying to make yourself look good after being absent for so long. That cut deep. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was a knife twisted straight into everything I had done for her. He was rewriting history in real time, tearing away the proof of her life, erasing the physical reminders of her love, and pinning the blame on me. But the final straw came when I stepped into Mom's bedroom. The closet door was wide open, and I saw it immediately, her jewelry chest. Or rather, the empty space where it used to be. The small mahogany box she'd kept on the dresser with her wedding ring nestled inside, along with a few heirlooms passed down from her mother. Gone. I turned on Lucas, my voice shaking. Where is it? He didn't even flinch. The ring? Sold it last week. Got a good price, too. Don't worry, I'll put it to good use. Something inside me broke at that moment. That ring wasn't just a piece of metal. It was the symbol of everything Mom had held onto after Dad died. She used to twist it gently whenever she was thinking, like it kept her grounded. And Lucas had sold it like it was nothing more than spare change in a pawn shop drawer. I remember standing there in the doorway of her empty room, my hands trembling, my throat so tight I could barely breathe. That was the turning point. The moment I realized Lucas wasn't just entitled, he was dangerous to Mom's memory, to the truth, to everything I cared about. And as much as it shattered me to see what he'd done, it also lit something inside me. A quiet, burning resolve. He thought he'd won. He thought he could strip the walls bare, spread lies, and walk away with everything. But he had no idea what Mom had done before she passed. No idea what was waiting for him once the official will was read. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a strange calm settle over me, because Lucas had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. And I knew then that when the time came, I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make sure his house of cards came crashing down in front of everyone he'd fooled. After that day in Mom's bedroom, I couldn't shake the image of her jewelry box being gone. The hollow space on the dresser where it had always sat. It haunted me. I went home to my apartment that night, sat down at the kitchen table, and just stared at my hands. They were still trembling. The anger I felt was suffocating, but underneath it was something heavier, a crushing sense of powerlessness. Lucas had stripped Mom's house bare, sold off her things, poisoned the family against me, and carried himself like a king sitting on a throne he hadn't earned. And the worst part? Everyone else seemed to be falling in line. It didn't matter what I said, because his version of the story, his lies, were louder. Over the next week, the isolation grew sharper. A cousin who used to call me almost daily suddenly stopped answering. An uncle who'd promised to stay neutral pulled me aside and said, "Maybe you should just let Lucas have it, Nathan. It's not worth tearing the family apart." Every word felt like another door closing, shutting me out of my own blood. The lowest point came at a family dinner. Lucas had organized it, naturally, under the guise of honoring Mom's memory. But when I arrived, it was clear what the real purpose was, parading himself as the rightful heir. He stood at the head of the table, telling stories about how he sacrificed for Mom. Stories that twisted the truth until I barely recognized them. When he described driving her to the hospital during one of her bad spells, he conveniently left out that it had been me sitting by her bedside all night while he went home to get some rest. I tried to interject, to correct him gently, but the room turned on me like I'd broken some sacred rule. "Nathan," one of my aunts snapped. "This isn't about arguing. Let Lucas speak." I swallowed hard and sat back. My appetite evaporated. By the end of the night, I felt like a ghost at the table, present but invisible. Every word I said dissolving before it even landed. When I left, I sat in my car for a long, long time. The engine off, the street lamp casting a dim glow across the windshield. I'd never felt so small, so cut off. It was like Lucas had stolen not just Mom's belongings, but my place in the family itself. That was my rock bottom. The realization that if I kept fighting on his terms, if I kept trying to argue louder than his lies, I would lose. Because he was controlling the narrative, painting me as greedy and absent, while I was the one clinging to memories and truth no one wanted to hear. But rock bottom has a strange way of clearing your vision. Sitting in that car, staring out at the empty street, I realized I couldn't fight him head-on. Not yet. I had to bide my time. Let him dig his hole deeper. Let him expose himself with his greed and arrogance. That's when I remembered Mom's quiet wisdom. Something she told me once after Dad passed: patience is what separates strength from anger. Anger burns itself out. Patience wins in the end. So, I decided to be patient. I stopped showing up at Lucas's orchestrated family meetings. I stopped trying to argue with cousins or defend myself against his lies. If they wanted to believe him, let them. I started walking away, retreating into silence, letting Lucas think he had finally broken me down. Because the truth, the real truth, was sitting in a sealed envelope at the lawyer's office, waiting for its moment. In the meantime, I began to prepare, quietly. I went through my own folders and files, gathering every piece of evidence I had of the time I'd spent caring for Mom, hospital records, receipts from prescriptions I'd picked up, even text messages she'd sent thanking me for staying overnight. I didn't know exactly how I'd use them yet, but I knew I'd need them when the time came. Lucas thought he'd banish me to the shadows. But what he didn't realize was that shadows can be powerful. They give you cover, time to think, time to plan. And as I sat alone in my apartment night after night, the anger inside me shifted. It wasn't wild or frantic anymore. It was steady, like a low fire burning in a hearth, waiting for the right moment to spread. I let Lucas keep climbing higher on his fake pedestal, knowing all along that the higher he went, the harder the fall would be when the truth finally came out. The weeks after that family dinner were the quietest of my life. Quiet, but not empty. I realized quickly that stepping back from Lucas's chaos gave me something I hadn't had since Mom got sick: space to breathe, space to think. At first, it felt strange, almost like I was surrendering. But then I started to notice a shift. Without Lucas constantly in my ear, without the pressure of trying to defend myself to a family that had already chosen sides, I found myself focusing on things I'd neglected for months. Work, for one. I'd been scraping by, juggling late nights at the office with Mom's care, always putting her first. After she passed, I was too drained to really focus. But now, with that fire burning quietly inside me, I poured myself into projects at work. I stayed late, volunteered for assignments nobody else wanted, and channeled all my frustration into proving myself. My boss noticed. Within 2 months, I'd been given a promotion. Nothing huge, but enough to make me stand taller. Enough to remind me I was capable of building a life that didn't revolve around Lucas's lies. And then came the money. With the promotion came a better paycheck. I tightened my spending, saved aggressively, and before long, I was able to move out of my cramped apartment into a condo across town. It wasn't massive, but it was mine. For the first time since Mom's passing, I looked around my own space and felt pride. Not the hollow pride Lucas paraded around with, but real pride, earned, solid, untouchable. But success wasn't just financial. It was personal, too. I reconnected with friends I'd pushed aside during Mom's illness. Friends who welcomed me back without judgment. They didn't care about Lucas's version of events. To them, I was still Nathan, the guy they'd laughed with, worked with, shared years of memories with. That circle gave me strength, reminding me that family wasn't only blood. It was the people who stood by you even when others turned their backs. Meanwhile, Lucas grew bolder. His arrogance blossomed in my absence. I started hearing through the grapevine that he was bragging about finally getting what he deserved, talking about renovations he planned to make to Mom's house, even mentioning trips he'd take once his inheritance came through. Each story made me shake my head. He didn't even realize he was stacking kindling around himself, waiting for the spark. Because what he didn't know, and what made it easier for me to smile, through it all, was the ace up my sleeve. Months before Mom died, she'd taken me aside during one of our quiet evenings together. She had this look in her eye, tired but sharp, like she wanted to make sure I understood something important. She told me about her will, the real one. She'd gone to the lawyer, updated everything, and made sure it was airtight. "I know your brother," she'd said softly, "and I know he'll try to take more than he deserves. But don't worry, I've made sure the truth is protected." I hadn't told anyone about that conversation. Not a soul. But I carried it with me like armor, especially now. Every time Lucas sold another piece of her life or gloated about his supposed victory, I remembered Mom's words. And instead of despair, I felt calmer, stronger, because I knew what was coming. As my own life improved, work, friends, even my health, as I started taking better care of myself, I realized something else. Revenge wasn't just about the final strike. It was about building myself up so high that when Lucas inevitably fell, the contrast would be undeniable. He'd be exposed not just as greedy, but as pathetic compared to what I'd become. And so, while he bragged, I prepared. I organized every record I had of helping Mom. I built a network of support outside the family that Lucas couldn't touch. I strengthened myself financially, emotionally, and mentally. Slowly, I was no longer the ghost at the table. I was becoming someone who didn't need their table at all. Lucas thought he had silenced me. But what he didn't realize was that I was rising quietly in the background, growing into someone he couldn't manipulate, someone he couldn't erase. And soon, the day would come when the lawyer finally called us in. The day Lucas had been waiting for, the day he thought would cement his victory. I was ready for it. More ready than he could ever imagine. The letter from the lawyer arrived on a Wednesday morning. I remember the exact moment because I'd just brewed a fresh cup of coffee and was checking emails before heading into work. The envelope slid under my door with a soft thud, plain and unassuming. But the second I saw the law firm's letterhead, my pulse quickened. Inside was a notice. The official reading of Mom's will was scheduled for the following week. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the letter, the steam from my coffee curling into the air. For months, I had been waiting for this moment, quietly building myself back up while Lucas flaunted his ownership of everything. Now, the countdown had begun. But before that day arrived, something else happened. Something that gave me an edge I didn't even realize I needed. At work, part of my promotion had given me access to new responsibilities, including managing budgets and contracts. That's where I stumbled into a seminar on document authentication. A dry-sounding workshop that ended up being anything but. The speaker, a forensic handwriting analyst, demonstrated how signatures could be faked and how easy it was to spot subtle differences if you knew what to look for. My mind instantly flashed to that paper Lucas had waved in the dining room, the one with Mom's signature. After the seminar, I lingered, introducing myself to the analyst, a woman named Dr. Patel. I asked a few casual questions about personal documents, wills, and the process of verifying handwriting. She smiled politely, but when I hinted that I had a family matter involving questionable paperwork, she leaned in a little closer. "If you ever need an expert opinion," she said, handing me her card, "give me a call. You'd be surprised how many families get torn apart by forged signatures." I slipped her card into my wallet, and it felt like sliding a dagger into a sheath, quiet, hidden, but sharp enough to pierce when the time came. That wasn't the only weapon I gained. A few days later, while sorting through my folders at home, I found a series of text messages from Mom that I had almost forgotten about. They were simple things, her thanking me for bringing her groceries, reminding me of her medication schedule, telling me how much she appreciated me being there. One message stood out above the rest. It read, "Nathan, I'm glad we finalized everything with the lawyer today. I feel relieved knowing my wishes are clear. Don't let Lucas bully you when I'm gone. Love you." I just sat there holding my phone, staring at those words. My chest tightened, but not with sadness this time, with determination. That message wasn't just proof of my involvement in her care. It was Mom's voice reaching out from the past, confirming what I already knew. She had anticipated this fight, and she had trusted me to withstand it. Meanwhile, Lucas kept slipping. With every passing day, he grew louder about his inheritance. At one point, he even bragged to a mutual friend about planning to refinance Mom's house for a big renovation project. The arrogance was staggering. He was already spending money he didn't have, counting on a win that wasn't his. And then, as if the universe was nudging me along, Grace, the cousin who'd quietly doubted Lucas from the start, called me out of the blue. "Nathan," she whispered over the phone. "I think something's wrong." Lucas told me he had proof Mom wanted him to have everything. But when I asked to see it again, he got defensive. He wouldn't show me. He said I was disrespecting her memory by questioning him. I closed my eyes, smiling to myself. His cracks were starting to show. People were beginning to notice. By the time the day of the will reading drew near, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again, stronger than I had been since the funeral. Lucas thought he'd isolated me, but in reality, he'd only made me more focused. I had allies. Quiet ones, maybe, but enough. I had evidence. I had an expert waiting on call. And most importantly, I had Mom's voice, her love, and her foresight guiding me from beyond. Lucas had built his empire on lies. But I had something he would never have, the truth, sharpened and ready. And when we all sat down at that long oak table in the lawyer's office next week, with Lucas puffed up like a king waiting for his crown, I was going to let him walk straight into his own downfall. The day of the will reading felt surreal. The air outside was heavy with late summer heat. And as I walked up the steps to the lawyer's office, my palms were damp. Not from nerves, at least not entirely, but from the weight of knowing this was the moment everything had been building toward. The office was old, with dark wood paneling and the faint smell of paper and leather that reminded me of libraries. When I stepped into the conference room, Lucas was already there. He was leaning back in his chair like he owned the place, one arm draped lazily across the backrest, his folders sitting in front of him like some prized possession. "Glad you could make it," he said, smirking. "I was beginning to think you decided to bow out gracefully." I didn't rise to it. I just slid into the chair across from him, nodding politely. Wouldn't miss it. Family trickled in. Our aunts, a few cousins, even Uncle Harold, who lived 2 states away. The air buzzed with quiet chatter, but I noticed something different this time. Grace caught my eye and gave me the faintest nod, like a secret handshake. A small thing, but it steadied me. Finally, Mr. Sullivan, Mom's lawyer, entered the room carrying a thick, sealed envelope. He was a man of precision, every movement deliberate, every word measured. He took his seat at the head of the table and cleared his throat. "We are gathered today to read the last will and testament of Margaret Hayes," he began, his voice calm but firm. "Before I do so, I understand there has been some confusion." That was Lucas's cue. Right on schedule. He leaned forward, sliding his folder across the table. "There's no confusion," he said smoothly. "Mom wrote down her wishes. I have her signed statement right here. The house and savings were meant for me, as repayment for the years I cared for her." He opened the folder with a flourish, pulling out the paper and holding it aloft like some kind of trophy. His eyes swept the room, daring anyone to contradict him. A few relatives exchanged uneasy glances. Mr. Sullivan didn't even blink. He reached out, took the paper carefully, and adjusted his glasses. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint rustle as he examined it. Then, in a tone so neutral it was almost chilling, he said, "This is not a valid legal document." Lucas's smirk faltered. "What do you mean?" "That's Mom's signature. She wrote it herself." Mr. Sullivan set the paper down, folding his hands neatly on the table. "I am familiar with your mother's handwriting as she updated her will with me personally. This signature does not match her authentic hand. Furthermore, even if it were genuine, this document lacks the necessary witnesses and notarization required to be legally binding." The silence that followed was thick, punctured only by a few gasps. Lucas's face flushed red, but he wasn't done yet. "You're wrong," he snapped. "She told me herself. She wanted me to have everything. Nathan was never around." That's when I leaned forward, my voice calm but steady. "That's not true, Lucas. And you know it." He whipped his head toward me, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare," but I cut him off, sliding my phone onto the table. "Mom told me about her real will months before she passed. She made it clear. She even texted me after finalizing it. I tapped the screen, pulling up the message, and turned it so everyone could see. Nathan, I'm glad we finalized everything with the lawyer today. I feel relieved knowing my wishes are clear. Don't let Lucas bully you when I'm gone. Love you. The room collectively inhaled. Aunts leaned closer. Cousins whispered. Grace's eyebrows shot up, and I saw Uncle Harold sit back in his chair, lips pursed. Lucas sputtered. That doesn't prove anything. You could have. Mr. Sullivan raised a hand, silencing him. Then he opened the sealed envelope and pulled out the official will. There will be no more speculation. This is Margaret Hayes's final notarized will and testament, witnessed by 2 parties and kept in my possession until today. He began to read. The words washed over the room like a tide, each one dismantling the lies Lucas had built. The house was to be split between both of us equally. The savings were to be divided fairly, with a portion set aside for charitable donation, something Mom had always wanted. Her personal belongings, the heirlooms, were to be shared thoughtfully, not sold off like junk. And then came the part that hit Lucas like a hammer, a clause Mom had added specifically, naming me as the executive of the estate. Not him. Me. Gasps rippled through the room again. Lucas's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. Mr. Sullivan looked up from the document, his gaze cool. Your mother was very clear about her intentions. She anticipated difficulties and made sure her wishes would be carried out without interference. I sat there, hands folded calmly, while inside I felt a deep, steady surge of vindication. Lucas had strutted, lied, and manipulated his way into believing he'd already won. But here, in black and white, was Mom's voice, clear, undeniable, and final. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I watched the smug mask slip from his face. The room stayed silent after the will was read. The kind of silence that feels heavy, almost suffocating. Lucas sat frozen, his face pale beneath the flush of anger. For once, he didn't have a script prepared. He looked around the table, waiting for someone, anyone, to defend him, but no one spoke. The family that had once nodded along to his lies now avoided his eyes, their silence louder than any condemnation. Finally, Uncle Harold broke it. Lucas, he said slowly, shaking his head. You sold off your mother's belongings. You lied to all of us. And for what? Greed. Lucas's mouth opened, but no words came out. He stammered something about misunderstanding and Mom's wishes, but the strength was gone from his voice. He looked smaller somehow, like the pedestal he built had been yanked out from under him in an instant. Grace leaned forward. You tried to make us believe Nathan didn't care. You tried to erase what he did for her. But it's all right here. In her words. You can't argue with that. The shift was immediate. Relatives who had once whispered doubts about me now turned toward Lucas with narrowed eyes and pursed lips. He had spent months painting himself as the saint. But now the mask was gone. Everyone could see what lay beneath. Not devotion, not sacrifice, but entitlement and deceit. Mr. Sullivan cleared his throat, breaking the tension. As executive, Nathan will oversee the distribution of assets and ensure the estate is settled in accordance with Margaret's wishes. Any unauthorized sales of her property will need to be accounted for and may be subject to legal action. He paused deliberately. That includes jewelry and heirlooms recently removed from the home. Lucas's head snapped up, panic flashing across his eyes. You can't. Those things are gone. I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. You'll have to explain that to the court, Lucas. Every dollar, every item you sold. It all has to be reported. Mom made sure of it. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For once, he had no clever retort, no smug dismissal, just fear. The rest of the meeting wrapped quickly after that. Relatives left in clusters, whispering to each other, casting glances back at me that were filled with a mix of shame and apology. Grace gave my shoulder a squeeze before she walked out. Uncle Harold clapped me on the back, muttering, "Your mom would be proud, kid." Lucas lingered until the end, standing stiffly by the table. "This isn't over," he hissed at me under his breath. I met his glare with a steady look. "It is. Mom made sure of that." For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but instead he turned sharply on his heel and stormed out of the room. The sound of the doors slamming echoed through the office like the final note of a song. When the last of them were gone, I sat alone at the table, with the will still in front of me. My hands rested on the smooth paper, and for the first time in months, I felt a deep sense of peace. Mom's voice had carried through the noise, louder than Lucas's lies, stronger than his manipulation. She'd trusted me, and I hadn't let her down. I gathered my things and walked outside. The late summer heat hit me again, but it felt different this time, lighter, like a burden had been lifted. As I stood there, I glanced up at the sky, the sunlight filtering through the clouds, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom." Then I turned and walked down the steps, leaving Lucas's anger and lies behind me for good. And that was the last time he ever held power over me. What a ride, right? This whole ordeal taught me so much about family, betrayal, and finding strength when you feel utterly alone. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself or for someone you love against a family member who was only out for themselves? What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more real-life narratives like this.